for a few more people to join, and then we'll start. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are here to discuss a very important topic, specifically focusing on how we can catalyze holistic resilience solutions for the Egyptian MSMEs. My name is Zila Malia, Manager Risk and Resilience in FSD Africa, and I'll be facilitating the call today. The reason for us, we feel that MSMEs are a key focus and are important for Africa is because in the developing world specifically, particularly Africa, MSMEs act as essential drivers for employment, growth, economic welfare, and MSMEs at the moment account for over 90% of all businesses in sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa as well, which contributes to 40% of the GDP on average. So we definitely have to focus on MSMEs, and you're going to hear a bit more about the facts and the figures on MSMEs and why it's important and how we can actually catalyze holistic growth within the session. So I'd like to take you through some housekeeping before we start the call. You will notice that your microphone was automatically on mute when you join. This is because we would like to reduce the background noise during the presentation so that we can hear the speakers and the presenters clearly. Your video is also disabled because we would like to have a very good view of the presentation and the slides. But we are still very keen on having an interactive session. So the chat box is open. Please feel free to chat, to add your comments, any feedback, any questions, please add them on the chat. And we will definitely make sure that we're going to respond during the session, or we'll also have a Q&A session at the end where we're going to discuss and respond to all the questions on the chat. So just to quickly take you through the agenda, we'll start with the keynote address from Kelvin Massingham, Director Risk and Resilience, FSD Africa. Then we'll have introductory remarks from Shahir Soliman, Emerging Customers Lead from AXA. AXA played a very important role as they were giving us the perspective, the insurance perspective, the Egyptian insurance perspective. Then Senfree, Vera will come in. Senfree is our research partner and they led this research. She will present the findings from the research and why it's actually important to support holistic growth for MSMEs. Then we'll have a quick panel discussion whereby Michaela from Senfree will join us and Soliman Shahir as well. And then lastly, we'll have a Q&A session where we'll be able to answer some of the questions that we might not have answered in the chat. So please help me welcome Kelvin Massingham to give his introductory remarks. Thank you. You're welcome, Kelvin.
Thank you very much, Zilla, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. As Zilla said, my name is Kelvin Massingham. I'm Director of Risk and Resilience at FSD Africa, and FSD Africa sponsored this research, and we're a development agency that's focused on the financial sector. As you can see in my background, our mission is to make finance work for Africa's future, and so we're concerned with how do the financial markets contribute to sustainable economic development in Africa, things like creating jobs, creating access to basic services, and protecting the environment. And as Zilla said in her intro, really the backbone of Africa's economy is our MSMEs, and so in order to have sustainable economic development, we need to ensure that those SMEs are resilient and that we mainstream resilience for them. And so that's really the background to this project. Also the fact that we see that MSMEs have a very high failure rate, so they're highly vulnerable, and that's because they face a multitude of risks and that have very limited coping mechanisms to deal with those risks. And to date, the financial sector hasn't really played a key role in contributing to resilience of SMEs. It's largely been kind of access to credit that has been provided by the financial sector. And so SMEs need risk management solutions, both risk mitigation and risk transfer. And what I mean by that is, by risk mitigation is solutions that reduce the impact of the risks they face. And so if fire is the risk that they're exposed to, then having something like an early warning system it helps to kind of reduce the impact when a fire occurs, but they also need risk transfer. So insurance solutions are an example where if an event does occur, that they're compensated for the damages and so have a safety net. What we also see that SMEs need is solutions that are tailored to their specific needs, because they're not homogeneous. And so, you get different stages of development of SMEs, but you also get huge differences between different value chains. And so the solutions that need to be developed need to be specific to the particular risks that they face. And so this project wanted to demonstrate a new approach, an approach that looked holistically at the different risks that SMEs face, and both risk mitigation and risk transfer. And so to deliver a bundled solution that deals more holistically than just with risk transfer, and also an approach that looked specifically at the unique challenges of particular value chains. And so it was really a deep dive into different value chains within the Egypt SME sector, just to understand the nuances and specifics that SMEs faced in different value chains. And then the objective is really to demonstrate commercial viability for an insurer bundling solutions with value-added service providers to offer these solutions to SMEs. And so it's been an exciting journey working with a great team of partners, and really looking forward to being able to present the results to you today. And I think one of the things that really has excited me about this project is that we've been able to get really granular and look at, deeply into particular value chains, and you can hear more about that today, and really understand the specific needs of SMEs in value chains, and then look at how do we bring together value-added service providers, intermediaries, payment providers, to craft solutions that make sense, and then to start to pilot them. And so it's been a good journey. We've also been able to develop the full business case for how does this make sense for the financial sector to offer. And so looking forward to hearing today. This is an important topic. We need different approaches, and so I think this provides a framework for how do you look at risk solutions for SMEs. And so even if you don't take away the specific examples for Egypt, for other countries, for other contexts, the approach that's been taken, I think there's a lot to learn from that. And so I'm really looking forward, and I'll hand back over to Zilla.
Thank you very much, Calvin. Thank you for those keynote address and remarks. We look forward to hearing more about the findings shortly, so please stay tuned. I'd like to introduce Shahir Soliman from AXA. He'll just give us an overview of why he was interested in participating in this research study and what excited him about the research and findings. And you can also just let us know and give us more of an overview of what you're doing in AXA as well. So you're welcome, Shahir. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be speaking to all of you about this research. It really comes at an important time for MSMEs in Egypt. We're seeing a lot of focus on this important sector. As mentioned previously, they make up 90% of enterprises in Egypt, and what we're seeing is very strong economic policies. Just to give an example, the Central Bank of Egypt has mandated all banks to increase their loan portfolio for MSMEs by 25%. And just to give a highlight on this, we're talking about, by the end of this year, loans for over 100,000 MSMEs. So there really is a large opportunity here, and a big market of consumers that want their risks to be addressed. And I'm really excited for you to see the research that will be presented here today, because, and this is directed more for the people that work in the insurance industry in Egypt. We face a lot of frustration sometimes because of the misconceptions of insurance, the challenges that have to do with insurance, whether it's awareness or just cultural differences compared to other markets. What we're really seeing here, and it's good to take a step back for moments like this where we get to look at research, is that consumers are really interested in hearing about risk solutions that address the issues they face. And what we really noticed is that despite all this misconception and challenge, that people are very aware of their risks, and more importantly, they are very interested to hear about different solutions that can address these risks. And not just insurance, but insurance being bundled with other services. which really creates an opportunity to build new partnerships, to try out different distribution channels other than those that we have traditionally seen in the market. And I hope this would be a very inspiring session for everyone here. And this research really is focused on retailers and farmers, particularly in the tomato and in the dairy sectors. And I'm very excited to see more light being shed on the agriculture sector, because it isn't being served enough, and it's a very important segment, and it's contributing a lot, especially to this area. So I hope it would be a very insightful session for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shahir, and thank you for your input during the research. You provided a very good perspective, from the insurers market in Egypt. Moving on to the presentation, we'll have Vera from Senfree sharing the presentation. Specifically, we'll be looking at the project rationale, the objectives of the study, most importantly, the findings, and the final key takeaways from the research. So you're welcome, Vera. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Zilla, and welcome everyone. As Zilla said, I'm Vera. I'm a research associate at Senfree and was quite a bit involved in the research that we did. I'm just going to take you quite briefly, what are the key findings and background details of the study. But please feel free to also, if you want to get more in-depth insights of the study, to take a look at the report that we published also around it. So I think we already heard quite a bit, about the project rationale and the importance that MSMEs play within emerging market economies, and particularly also in Egypt, and that they are really a major economic force within the Egyptian economy. And it was also already touched on, that these MSMEs, as Calvin also remarked on, they do face a multitude of risks. So if we're looking at Egyptian MSMEs, for instance, cash flow challenges and liquidity risks are really something that concerns the majority of MSMEs within Egypt. For instance, the majority of the investments is all based on internal funds. It really shows also how constrained they often are to access external financing. Although also, as Shahir highlighted, there is quite a big push by the Egyptian government to open up more channels for access to finance for MSMEs. Then another factor that's also very important to consider is that climate change is leading more frequently and to more severe natural disasters, which is also the case in Egypt. So for instance, flood risk is something that will increase a lot and does not only affect individuals, but also businesses to a large extent. Another risk, which we've seen a lot in the COVID-19 pandemic coming through, is business interruptions. So due to some event or, power outages, lockdowns and other factors, MSMEs are not able to operate the way they usually operate, and their business activities are interrupted, which can also really severely impact their growth and sustainable development. And another risk, which is more related to the business owner and the staff, are obviously also health risks, right? So if the business owner or the staff is facing illness or sickness, then this leads to expenditure on their end, but also obviously affects the business. So there's really quite a variety of risks and challenges that MSMEs experience within the Egyptian context, and that they are quite heavily exposed towards too. But then, as already highlighted, is that they don't really have access to formal coping mechanisms to better deal with this risk. So we had that they are really funding constrained and don't have access to formal credit, but also access to insurance is very low, right? It's below 1% in Egypt. So we see this big exposure to risk, but currently the financial sector is not, at least the formal financial sector isn't playing a big role in supporting them to better deal with this risk. And why is that the case? And I think Shahir also already reflected, around some of the factors that are at play here when we're looking at why are insurers not serving more the segment, or what does make it so challenging to tap into the MSME segment? Because I think, most players are aware that this is a big segment to tap into. But the issue that Shahir also touched on too is that MSMEs often, have quite a negative perception around insurance. It's also something that really came through in the research. And that is, obviously also because of claims management issues, but also because the products that are in the market often don't provide a lot of values to the businesses. So it might be quite a standard off-the-shelf product, which doesn't really apply to the unique business challenges this particular business experiences. Another one is also that MSMEs are often not well aggregated, right? So there might not be a lot of very formalized organizations that aggregate MSMEs and through which then the products can be distributed. So it can often be quite challenging to figure out how can these MSMEs actually be reached. And then what was also mentioned by Calvin is that MSMEs are very heterogeneous. So they vary a lot between economic sectors. They conduct quite different activities. They are at different stages of development. They have different exposures to technology. So only offering one product often doesn't work that well because they are exposed to very different risks. So figuring out, okay, but where's now here a segment of MSMEs that is relatively homogeneous, that does experience similar risks and challenges, and for which I can actually tailor a product, can be challenging. And that is also related to a lack of data. So often there's very limited data available on MSMEs. Luckily in Egypt, there are at least, there is the census on the businesses, which does give quite a bit information around market size, but then gaining more in-depth information around the risks and challenges that these businesses face is often a real constraint. So what we did in the study is to use an approach to look at these challenges and see what can we do to overcome them. And the first step that we did here is to segment MSMEs by using a value chain approach. So we looked at, what are the different economic sectors, what are the different value chains within the sectors, and which of these ones look most viable for such a bundled solutions that we have in mind. Then the second step for us was to look at, okay, now that we know this value chain structure, what are the different points of aggregation that exist within this structure? And how formalized are these aggregation points within the value chain, and what is their potential to be leveraged as distribution partners? Then the third step was to, now once we knew, okay, this is kind of a segment of MSMEs that we want to target, what are now their key risks? What are their key needs in terms of resilience? And, really asking them and exploring this issue, because as Shahir also mentioned, they are often very well aware of the different risks they face. So really exploring per value chain, what are the key risks and challenges faced? And then the fourth step was to, as Calvin also already explained, is to bring together a risk mitigation solution with a risk transfer solution. So for instance, if theft was something that really came up as a challenge, then to see, okay, can we combine an anti-shoplifting device with a theft cover? So thinking through how can we come up with a solution that helps MSMEs to avoid that the risk occurs in the first place, but to still also be protected in case it nevertheless occurs by an insurance policy. And we're just gonna start a poll now around these key challenges to see also what your view is, what are the most severe challenges that insurers face when trying to serve MSMEs. And I'm just going to pause for a while for you to be able to answer it. We're going to reflect on the results at the end of the presentation. There are still 2 more poll questions coming. And now, you know, that we had this approach in mind, we wanted to put it in practice. And as Calvin already outlined, this study was really to see what is the commercial variability of this approach within the Egyptian context, but to also demonstrate this value beyond the Egyptian context, right? Because I think this approach is not specific to the Egyptian context, this project was. So to show, you know, what does it mean to apply it within this particular country context? And the first phase was now to really probe around that, conduct the consumer research, understand it better. And then the next 2 phases are around, you know, putting this into practice and piloting 1 or 2 of the solutions that came out as being very strong in the business case that was developed throughout the project. And how we derived the insights. So we used different methodologies. The first one was desktop research that really helped us to understand and prioritize Egyptian sectors and value chains to really see, you know, what's the different data and information available that we can leverage. Then the other component which really stood at the center of the research was the consumer research, where we discussed challenges and product preferences with 108 aspirational MSMEs in 3 identified value chains. So with MSMEs, we largely relied on the Central Bank of Egypt definition of enterprises, but we also included smallholder farmers because the agricultural sector is of high significance, and smallholder farmers do operate like small businesses. And we focused on the aspirational segment, so not those survivalist enterprises, which are often, you know, not a very viable segment to serve, but rather on those ones that really do want to grow their business and extend their business. And then to augment these demand side insights, we also conducted a range of supply side interviews with financial sector providers, digital platforms, industry associations. So some of the key stakeholders within the value chain to understand a bit more, okay, what are their challenges in reaching MSMEs, and what are maybe some partnership opportunities that we do see arising, especially from a distribution point of view. Now I just want to take you through, you know, quite high level through the different project findings, by going through the different steps that I outlined earlier for the approach. So our first step was to select a value chain. And for this, we first looked at the different economic sectors according to a range of criteria. And then within those sectors, we looked, okay, but what are the different value chains within the sectors? Because the sectors are obviously quite broad, and it's often not sufficient enough to identify a group of MSMEs that are quite homogeneous in terms of their risk profile. So when selecting a value chain, we looked at a range of criteria. So one very important one from a business perspective, business case perspective, is, are there actually sufficient aspirational enterprises that are within this value chain? And is there among those enterprises a large enough homogeneous risk pool that could be served with one product, right? So are there sufficient MSMEs that at a certain point within the value chain do conduct similar activities and experience, because of that, also similar risks and challenges. And another key component was to look at, from the value chain structure, are there certain aggregation points that could be leveraged from a distribution perspective? So to really, look also from a business case perspective, which value chain would make the most sense, but also considering beyond that, what is the contribution to employment, for instance, and especially female employment of this value chain, and how important is it also from a livelihood perspective. And when we selected the sectors, selected the value chain according to those criteria, we saw that the retail value chain, the dairy value chain, as well as the tomato value chain really seem to show the most promise to be served with such a bundled solution, and to really have a large enough target market for one particular product. Because MSMEs are often quite fragmented, so it's actually also not that easy sometimes to find a value chain that both has a good aggregation point, but also a sufficient number of homogeneous MSMEs. Then once we conducted that, we looked in the second step around, a bit deeper, okay, who are now these different aggregators, and how suitable would they be actually to serve as a distribution partner? So I'm first gonna start with a poll now around the different aggregators, just to get your views, who you think would be best as distribution partners. So I'm just gonna give you a minute to reply to that and then continue. Okay, then while you're still responding, I'm also gonna continue. So we looked at each of the value chains and at the different aggregators, and we can see, it is definitely valuable to not look, okay, across all MSMEs, what are key distribution points, but to rather actually really, kind of painted the structure of the value chain to understand how does money flow, which relationships exist, and which key stakeholders have a lot of relationships to a network of MSMEs. For the retail value chain, we could really see that digital platforms do play more and more of a role as a key aggregation point for retail MSMEs. So we see that from a digital payment perspective, for instance, Fari is a key digital payment provider which aggregates a lot of MSMEs, but we also see it from a stock ordering perspective, right? More and more retail MSMEs are ordering their stock through digital marketplaces, which then obviously also have, quite a big network of MSMEs that they are connected to. Other platforms are also then e-commerce platforms, so the retail businesses themselves selling their produce to the end customer through the platform. So we could really see, especially in the retail sector, and accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, digital platforms and marketplaces are a key point of aggregation for these enterprises. And they often also have very regular and trusted engagements with these businesses, which is important, especially having in mind this negative perception of insurers. So having a trusted distribution partner on your side can really help to overcome a hesitancy of smaller businesses to engage with you as an insurer and to take up an insurance product. Then for the dairy and the multi-value chain, so more for the agriculture sector side, we can see that the more traditional players, such as financial service providers, especially banks, still play an important role within that. And another key point, often something like, for instance, collection centers, because milk often needs to be collected at a particular point, and they obviously have relationship with a range of MSMEs, or also processing firms, which are the key purchasers of agricultural output in the dairy and tomato value chain, can also be one of those important potential distribution partners. So when looking at the different value chains and exploring more the structure and relationships, having interviews with the different players, we could really see that there is actually a variety of aggregation points. Not all of them are perfectly well suited to be distribution partners, but there is definitely something to choose from and to think creatively about when approaching the distribution point of view for MSME insurance. Then for the third step, and that is really where the consumer research came in, was to explore what are the needs and challenges of those MSMEs. And we could see that across the three value chains, cash flow challenges is really something all of these MSMEs experience, and it's kind of really front of mind for them. But then when we're looking beyond cash flow challenges, we can see that the risks and challenges do differ quite a lot between the value chains. So that kind of really reiterates again how important it can be to segment MSMEs and to really understand, okay, in this value chain, those are the key challenges. In this value chains, those are the key challenges, because that then enables us to really come up with a tailored product for this particular segment of the market. In the retail value chain, we could see a lot of concerns and challenges around the stock, right? If it's the theft of stock, if it's being destroyed through fire, if it's the management of stock in terms of expiry date. So that is what a lot of concerns and challenges are about. When we're looking at the dairy and tomato value chain, we could see that weather and climate impact play quite a bigger role. So, high temperatures, then something like temperature changes, those are really affecting those value chains, but also concerns about the health of the livestock or the health of the crop is something that's really obviously front of mind of the farmers and businesses operating in those value chains. So we could really see, unpacking particular per value chains, what are the key challenges and risks is definitely very useful, as well as looking at what are the coping mechanisms that are currently in place. And there we could see that the coping mechanisms are often quite traditional and are not much use of technology, and might often also be not that sustainable in the long run. So if we're looking, for instance, at the milk storage issue, so that there's milk spoilage, because the milk might not have been picked up on time, or there's an overproduction of milk, and then just boiling the milk or giving it to relatives is not really what is the most sustainable from a business development perspective for this particular farmer. So really, it showed us, there are these challenges, but they are currently often not that well-established coping mechanisms in place that really enable them to sustainably deal with those risks. And then in the fourth step, what we did, once we explored these different challenges with the farmers and the retail MSMEs, we then looked at the concept of bundling. So if we were, to bundle now a risk mitigation product together with a risk transfer product and would offer this as one bundled product to you, would you be interested in that? Is that something, that resonates with you? And we could really see from our engagement with them that, yes, product bundling is really something that provides us with value. And I think this retail grocery shop owner really expresses it well, right? So the risk mitigation mechanism or product helps him or her to fight theft accidents, so to kind of prevent the risk from happening. But then if the risk nevertheless occurs, the insurance cover is there to help, right? And to cover you in that event. So it's really something that integrates each other and can provide to that more value than just the insurance cover alone. But what we also see is that, you know, this concept of bundling is obviously something new. So it needs to be promoted in a way that's simple to understand and to engage, and really relates to, okay, I have this challenge, you know, that is the challenge business experience. And if we combine the insurance cover with the risk mitigation mechanism, it enables you on a day-to-day basis to better deal with your risks. So really, you know, explaining this concept in a simple and understandable manner is very important. Then when now looking at the overall study results, you can see that we tested a range of solutions with them and also a range of insurance covers. So as already explained, you know, we looked at the different risks, and then we looked, okay, if shoplifting is a major challenge, what are some existing solutions within Egypt or outside of Egypt that could be offered to MSMEs to be able to better deal with that challenge? So for instance, an anti-shoplifting device or an inventory management solution. And then what are different insurance covers that also relate to the risk, and how well resonate they with the different MSMEs? And then we, you know, looked, okay, if they would be bundled, also how well would that resonate? And we can really see that there is actually a demand for both insurance covers, but also those risk mitigation technologies and mechanisms. So for both, you know, they are really interested, and they really do see value for it and for their own businesses. And we saw that across all of the 3 value chains, and also that there are actually quite some exciting solutions already available that help them to better deal with risks. So for instance, in the tomato value chains, there are some apps through which farmers, you know, can take a picture, assess, okay, this is the pest or disease that my crop has, and that is what I can do against it. And that could then maybe nicely be bundled together with a crop insurance cover. So to wrap up the findings, we could really see within those 3 value chains that we identified that there is a strong demand for products that enable businesses to better deal with the risks and to more holistically deal with the risks. Then to look at the key takeaways, so what did we now, a bit also outside of the Egypt context, learn from, you know, applying this approach, putting those different steps into practice? And we really learned that, yes, applying a value chain lens is useful, because it enables us to group MSMEs with homogeneous risks, which is often very challenging to do. And for the second step, it also enables us to identify a range of MSME aggregators. And there we could really see the importance also of digital platforms playing more and more of a role. Then for the third step, we could see, you know, cash flow challenges are a key risk. And I don't think that's very surprising. I mean, the MSME financing gap is something that is well known, but just reiterated that. But we could also see that beyond cash flow, the other challenges do differ quite a lot between value chains. So it is important to really have a more targeted and segmented approach to understand MSME challenges. And we could see that climate events and, you know, temperature and climate-related challenges are also something, especially in the agriculture sector, that needs to be considered, and that bundling solutions, risk mitigation with risk transfer products is really something that resonated well with them. And we think for this to be taken forward, there needs to be quite a bit of engagement from insurance providers together with providers of some of those solutions. If it's a credit solutions, so maybe just with a bank or fintech, if it's an inventory management solutions, if it's a crop management solution, but really insurance partners and technology providers to come together and foster partnerships and see, how they can maybe come up with those product bundles. But what we also see and acknowledge, obviously, is that this is quite a new thing, and it's quite a bit, upfront investment required into market research, into partnership discussions and setting up a partnership. And then if there isn't much certainty, for instance, from a regulatory perspective, what type of partnerships are allowed, what type of distribution channels are allowed, what type of bundling is feasible, then that obviously puts those upfront costs even higher, making it more challenging for insurance providers and technology providers to come together and to explore it. So I think regulatory certainty and a strong, promotion also from policymakers, for instance, to also promote certain aggregation points that then can serve as distribution partners, can really help this approach to take off. And also development partners can play a key role here to de-risk this upfront investment, to support, for instance, like in this study with the market research, to really get the process going and to decrease that upfront investment. And for instance, also for offering co-funding support. So we think for this approach, to be taken forward, that there is a lot of potential for it, but that it will be important that partnerships are fostered between insurance providers and technology providers, and that the ecosystem around them is created that really enables them to enter those partnerships and to go ahead and implement this approach. So that's just to reflect on the different findings that came through. As I said, the details can definitely be found in the study report. And I also see a question in the chat came up. So Laura, I see you asked around whether there was also anything related to the owner's ability to work came up. So that is interestingly something that didn't come up too high as a challenge that was raised. But when we tested the different insurance covers, we could see that there's definitely some demand for instance, health insurance cover. What came most up was also that life insurance is something that a lot of business owners are already familiar with, and they do want that their family and the family of the employees is protected. So personal risks is something that didn't rank as highly, interestingly enough, in the consumer research, but it nevertheless came through, in the different discussions and engagements that we had with MSMEs. And it's definitely personal insurance cover for business owners and their staff is also something that where we definitely saw interest for it. Over to you, Zilla.
Thank you very much, Vera.
And we can start the last poll, I think.
Yeah. As you bringing up the poll, I think what we see in this research is that bundling solutions is actually a great need for the MSMEs, but also that creates an opportunity for the different sectors within the value chain. So talk about the insurers, talk about the banks, the financial sector, and also the digital platforms. So this creates it's very important for us to come in and collaborate and create some of these holistic solutions that would serve the MSMEs. And each MSME, each value chain has its different needs, therefore needs a different kind of bundled solutions. And if you'd like to just get to hear more about all the other solutions that we also consider but did not come up, in terms of priority for the MSMEs, would be happy to have that conversation with you. So just reach out to Vera, Michaela, or myself, and we would have this discussion. So I would like to just quickly go through the polls. Angela, would you be able to share the results? So do you think this holistic approach is better to serve MSMEs in supporting their resilience? Is this valuable? I see most of you say it's, most of you strongly agree that it's valuable. So that's, that would be 85%. And we also saw value in this from the research. It's important for us to have an holistic approach and collaborate and come up with good bundled solutions that serve each value chain. The other poll question on challenges. So on the challenges that you think are most severe and pertinent in the Egyptian market, insurers' lack of data and knowledge about MSMEs came up top, and then lack of trust and awareness. And information asymmetry applies in actually most of the other sectors as well. Lack of data and knowledge has been an issue, and that's why we thought this research was important for us to see what the needs are, what the challenges that different value chains are experiencing, and how we can actually support. Then the other issue is lack of trust in and awareness in insurance. Through my experience working in the insurance sector, that has always come up top. Issues with payment of claims, if you can trust the insurance sector. And that ties in with the information asymmetry as well, whereby also the clients or the customers also feel they don't have that knowledge on how perhaps the insurance works specifically. The next poll result. So which distribution partners would be best to help insurers reach underserved MSME markets? We see financial service providers. It's important to use distribution channels that already exist. And for most of the African economies, we know that the banking system actually monopolizes the financial sector. So using that distribution channel would be very important. Then value chain aggregators, depending on the on the value chain. Also, what we saw from the research was the digital platforms, especially for the retail MSMEs, that would also work, because during the COVID period, digital platforms actually gained popularity, where people will get their stocks and order their stocks through the digital platform. So also very important in terms of a distribution partner for the MSMEs. So this takes us to the next session, which will be a quick panel discussion with some of the partners that were involved. So we have Shahir. I've already introduced him earlier. He has experience in strategic planning and project coordination and business support in the insurance industry, and he provided the insurance perspective in this research. He's the Emerging Customers Lead at AXA Egypt, and he's been in AXA Egypt for over 6 years. And also joining us on this panel discussion is Michaela Allen. She's a senior associate in Senfree. She was very instrumental in conducting this research and getting us to this final product. So please help me welcome Michaela and Shahir, just to have a quick discussion and get their views on this research. So thank you very much, Michaela, and Shahir, perhaps you can just quickly say hi before we get into the questions.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. It's very good to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. So, Michaela, I think I'll start with you because we only have a few minutes left. So when you think about holistic insurance frameworks, and based on what Vera has presented, there has been quite a shift of thinking in developing insurance for MSMEs. Although we're starting to see insurance providers across the world adopt, for example, in South Africa, where we have fire sense insurance products, and in Asia as well, where pilot trials are being conducted in India and Sri Lanka. What do you think is yet to fully undertake or take off in Africa specifically in terms of insurance frameworks?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Zilla, because as you mentioned, there definitely are demonstration cases out there in South Africa, but also across the developing world. And I wouldn't claim to know what all the challenges are, what's preventing providers from taking up this approach. It could be regulatory in nature, and it could be otherwise. But I think just from our research in Egypt, but also other countries like Uganda and Ghana and other countries around the world, I think the major sort of stumbling block is the complexity embedded in thinking about how to bundle a solution. Because in order to get this right, on the one hand, insurance providers need to have a very good sense of what actually would be tangible value for the MSME. That means that they constantly think about, oh, it'll be a great idea if I gave everyone, I don't know, a cap with every insurance policy. No, they need to understand what would resonate with an MSME. So that means having a very deep and good understanding of who those SMEs are, and to not sort of consider them at a very broad, homogeneous or sector level perspective. And on the other side, in order for something like this to really work, partnerships will be key, as Vera mentioned. You not only need to have a value-added service provider that can cater for that need, you also need to have an aggregator that can pool the collection of MSMEs together so that you have a ready risk pool to tap into. And whilst the value service provider could, in some cases, be that aggregator, so for instance, a commercial bank could potentially be both an aggregator and a provider of the value-added service, in a lot of the cases, for instance, in the agricultural sectors, you'll need to have two separate partners playing that aggregation role and that value-added service partner. And I think for many insurance providers, it's quite a difficult process to get those parties aligned, because you really have to have a common idea of what is the gap that you want to exploit. But then it also means that you need to bring everyone around the table. They need to buy into that gap. They need to adjust their own expectations and motivations for that. And I think what is quite nice about this framework that we developed is that it provides a starting point for that conversation. Because I think if you're going to find a common point to exploit an opportunity, you need to have an understanding of what that opportunity is. So I think what's quite nice is that we've been able to refine and streamline where we find the opportunities at a value chain level, and then to also provide information to kickstart those partnership conversations. And I think without that, it's really difficult to get that going because you have to have that information base. So I think there's a lot of complexity in bundling, but I think with research like this, it really helps shortcut some of that complexity, at least I hope.
Yeah, thank you, Makela. And just to come to you, Shahir, and just to get the Egyptian insurers' perspective, which finding from the consumer research did you find most surprising to you?
I think what was very surprising is that typically in the insurance industry in Egypt, we tend to feel that, health products or maybe like motor products are very popular because people sense this sort of risk in their day-to-day lives. And for someone that's unaware of insurance, usually this is the direction they go towards. But as Vera mentioned in the presentation, it was very surprising to see that farmers, for example, navigated more towards life insurance, a product that is usually quite hard to sell when you think about the low awareness, and due to sometimes cultural reasons, it's not quite popular or the obvious sort of solution to go for. So I think it kind of gives insurers a moment to step back and think that actually what we have the solutions that people need, and the focus more should be on how do we communicate it in the right way. But there is already interest and demand for it.
Yeah, so dealing with the information asymmetry there. Thank you, Shahir. So Makela, over to you. And we can't have conversations about value chains, especially in the agricultural sector, without talking about climate-related risks, as this is important in affecting farmers. So based on the study that you conducted, what do you think, how do you think we can ensure that resilience in the most vulnerable, communities to climate change is actually catered for? And how can we do that?
Yeah, I think that was quite a nice outcome of the study. I mean, we didn't really go into the study explicitly wanting to understand the environmental climate change aspect, but I think what's been quite nice is how strongly that has come out. And for me, what has affected my view on how to ensure the resilience of these farmers against climate-related shocks is simply the value of information. I think we always underestimate how important it is just to get information into the hands of the people that need it. And we assume that in this sort of ICT world, this digital economy, everyone has access to information at the tip of their hands to make really well-informed decisions. But just looking at the kind of risks that farmers have, a lot of it is around sort of what is this pest that's on my crop and what do I do in order to mitigate it? And from the research that Vera showed, farmers aren't really using technology to really inform their decision making. They're taking a backward-looking view. They're wanting to reflect, how did I manage this risk in the past year? And then can I apply this approach now? But I think because how climate change is moving in the rapid way that it is, I don't think farmers can afford to continuously rely on what's worked in the past, because temperature is changing, climate patterns are changing, and they need to start thinking about how to adapt better. And information is going to help them do that. That can be technology driven, but on the other hand, it needs to be designed in a way that meets farmers where they are. If farmers aren't using smartphones, we can't be designing solutions to share information that's very data intensive and relies on that smart technology. We need to think about how do we synthesize information and deliver it to farmers in a way that they can actually make use out of it. And that can definitely be linked to insurance policies or capital, but at the heart of it, it's around thinking through what is the role that financial service providers like insurers can play in getting information out there, but then most critically, how do we tailor the information so it's actually usable for the farmers? Because I think, particularly in African context, whether it's North Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa, farmers need to adapt. It's not about sort of changing anything, but it's around how do they roll with the punches of climate change. And I think the power of information is what I think we need to tap into better in the African context.
Yeah. Thank you, Makela. And talking about climate risks and how farmers need to adapt, Shahir, you've also mentioned, it was surprising for you to see that some of these MSMEs actually valued, life insurance. We see that there's importance in bundling some of these value-added services. And in your view, what is the feasibility of bundling, for these services in the insurance sector? Do you think, it's a viable segment that can serve the market?
Definitely, I think it doesn't make sense to ignore this segment. Just looking even at the data that's available, like 28% of the workforce in Egypt is made out of farmers. And if we just look at Upper Egypt alone, 55% of people employed are related to the agri sector. So there is a market there. And like Makela said, there is an awareness that is increasing for products such as crop insurance. And with incidents like last year with the famously known in Egypt, like the mango season, that was strongly affected because of change of temperature. So farmers are feeling more and more the risks of their own personal risks, but also to their businesses and climate-related risks. And this is the opportunity for insurers to come in. And again, as Makela said, and to complement, the focus here really should be how do we reach them, how do we communicate with them? If they're not using smartphones, I cannot be offering a solution that's tied to technology. And then it comes more to them thinking, is the focus supposed to be towards onboarding them to use technology, or should I be using traditional channels? And I think this is where it's important to pilot different models and see what works.
Yeah, and just talking about technology, we all know that MSMEs are hard to serve, especially due to the difficulty of reaching this segment, given the lack of aggregation and coordination among MSMEs. So I'd just like to ask you a few questions just to get your opinion and, just to get a bit more understanding of the Egyptian market, How easy has it been for the Egyptian insurance sector to cultivate some of these partnerships that are needed in this concept of bundling, the working reality?
I believe the challenge is always when you go out of the frame of traditional distribution partnerships in general. And if you're going to engage a new partner that might have that outreach, it's the idea of convincing them that insurance can be valuable and for them to have the vision for it. And when it's always something new, the first thought would always go naturally towards cost, and not just cost in terms of like time, but even implementation and so on. And our natural instinct is to always deploy a full-fledged solution. But in reality, I think it's more realistic to start with something small, a small benefit that can create impact for those target segments, for them to see the value, and then for that business in itself, that partner you're working with, to see these results, to see these initial results that can allow you to start from that small pilot, to roll out and go towards that full-fledged solution, that vision you have. But as a starting point, even though insurers are excited to go towards more deploying a full-fledged solution, something that works perfectly, it's easier to start small and then grow big.
Yeah. And at AXA, have you been able to develop some bundled products, and what have you seen as the biggest benefits so far of bundling some of these products?
I think the biggest benefit is that it allows insurers to be present at the customer's life, not just at point of claim, not at the worst case scenario. You're there to help them manage the risks that they see on a daily basis, but also at something that might not be as common in terms of, for example, like the life insurance we discussed. And you're addressing different risks. You're there for the quite common things, the day-to-day, but also you're there for the worst-case scenario.
And what are some of the challenges that, in regards to bundling, that feel exist in this regard, from the insurance perspective?
I think the challenge will always be finding the right partner to work with, and you need a partner that has the right outreach. You need to make sure you're developing a product that is simple, well understood by the end customer. But the benefit is when you actually reach that partner, what you end up having is a win-win situation for everyone. You are offering a partner a product that is valuable that helps the partner reach more customers, maybe retain them and so on. You're creating value adds for their existing solution. For that customer, they're receiving insurance that they wouldn't otherwise be able to find, or at least find at a higher cost. And for the insurance company, they end up reaching that segment that they want to target from the beginning.
Thank you, Shahir. Makela, just to bring you in, having had these challenges that Shahir has mentioned, what role do you think policymakers and development partners can play in overcoming them?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because obviously insurance providers don't operate in a vacuum. They operate within a regulatory space. And I think the most powerful role that a policymaker can play is to create that enabling environment to think outside of the box. I think often we have situations where you have a regulator or policymaker asking the industry to change, asking them to serve really hard to reach markets, but they're not being clear enough in terms of what isn't allowed. What are the rules to the game? What is the clarity? So I think a first step for policymakers would just be to open those lines of communication and engagement. This isn't to say that it's always sort of constrained in every economic context, but I think it's so simple, just having a forum to speak about what are the real and perceived challenges, what can we do to break down those perceptions, and what can we do to work with each other so that we can create a solution. I think just that alone can often go a long way, but policymakers often ignore that or don't realize the power of just speaking to industry players. And then in terms of the development partner perspective, I think maybe Zilli, you'd be best placed to answer that question. But I do think that from this research, I think going back to the importance around information being a catalyst to make really informed decisions and evidence-based decisions, I think there's a responsibility to have more research like this, particularly I think in the climate space, where that's increasingly going to be a really top of mind risk that retailers, that farmers are facing. And I think the more work that can be done in the space to understand how do we sift through all of the information, how do we synthesize it in a way that's actually useful, I think the more we'll be able to come up with really tangible solutions that can help make change for MSMEs, but also in terms of the grander scheme of things, in terms of just resilience and making an economy inclusive and bringing MSMEs along with that journey.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Makela. Thank you very much, Shahir. And thanks for supporting this research. You're very instrumental to getting us to this final result and the dissemination. So at this point, I think some of the key takeaways that we're seeing here is that collaboration is very important. There's no one player that can do everything. We all have to come in and do something, from policymakers, financial sector providers, us as the development partners, and the research partners as well, like Senfree. We need that information for us to actually serve the market. So we would like to actually have a conversation with you if you'd like to know more about the research. If you have any questions, we would like to answer your questions. I see there's some questions on the chat, and I'd just like to check if there's any question that has not been answered, or if you have any additional questions, please post them on the chat. We'll be happy to answer them at least for the next 5 minutes before we close. And in the meantime, Makela, Vera, perhaps you can share the information slide with some of the contacts, just in case there are any other questions that you'd like to ask us directly. You can reach out to us on email as well. So just checking the chat. So what is the definition of MSMEs in this research? And what is the value of that?
Maybe I can in to answer that one.
Sure.
So the definition that we leveraged was the Central Bank of Egypt's definition, which used turnover and employee numbers. I can't recall now the exact cutoffs, but what we then also looked at, is what can we actually define as aspirational, and then we looked at, what are the different turnover numbers and employee cutoffs around that. So for instance, in the retail value chain, it's kind of shops with 2 to 4 employees. In the dairy value chain, we looked at those farmers that have at least 10 cows. And in the tomato value chains, we looked at those that have at least 5 acres of land. So yeah, we kind of, looked a bit at the Central Bank of Egypt definition, but then also at some additional indicators to identify those ones that are aspirational.
Well, you're still there, Vera. Another question has just come up. Within the cash flow challenge, anything related to the owner's ability to work, perhaps in brackets due to how the caregiving that came up?
Yes, so I think, replied to that earlier already a bit. So personal risk wasn't something that was, top of mind and came up among the top 5 challenges, but it was raised. And especially when we tasted the different insurance products, we could see that an accident cover or life insurance cover is definitely something of high interest for business owners, and that is related to their personal risks or to their employee risks.
Thank you, Vera. Just one more, perhaps you can just quickly discuss it, how we can control the moral hazard with the strong tools with a low cost as well. I see you answered it on the chat, but perhaps you can just talk through it for 30 seconds before we close.
Yes, sure. So on the moral hazard, it is obviously, I think always a challenge, but when an insurer partners with a technology provider and they can then gain access to certain data points. So for instance, if we say it's an inventory management solution that is together with a business interruption cover, just as an example for the cover, then from the inventory management solutions and the general, business performance management solution, the insurer can, get quite a bit of insight. How well is that business owner actually managing their business, which then can be leveraged to also lower moral hazard risks. So yeah, I think access to data is definitely something that can help there. But obviously, consumer consent and consumer protection and making very clear for what the data is maybe also used in the insurance models is something that also needs to be front of mind.
Thank you very much, Vera. So Shahir, I'll just like to bring you in and answer one final question. From your experience, do you feel bundling too many solutions within one product makes a product too expensive? And will this fit, for example, for the MSMEs that we are targeting, do you think they will be able to pay for some of these bundled products?
I think definitely the cost factor is very important to always keep in consideration, and this is why it's always good with pilots, especially to start with a very simple benefit and probably just one value-added service with it. I think the more you increase the services, the issue is it splits up the focus for the customer, and instead of communicating on 2 things and trying to increase the awareness of insurance and the product and how to use it, and the same thing for that value-added service, you're splitting it to maybe 4 or 5 things, and then this doesn't really support the initial results of a pilot that you would want to establish. So I would definitely vote for simplicity in the start.
Sure. Thank you, Shahir. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly. We'll share our email addresses. Also, you can read the report that we've published. We'll also share the link to the report shortly. So thank you very much for joining the call. You've made it very interactive, and we hope that you can actually take up these results and the findings from this report to actually implement. I always believe that research is important, but it's only as important as we actually implement and use the data. So we need to use this data, we need to use these findings to actually come up with products that can support the MSMEs in Egypt. So thank you very much. I'm going to type my email address on the chat, so please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much. And thanks for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.